Today on Earth Focus, exploring the interaction between religion and environment in China. Filmmaker Gary Marcuse on his new film, Searching for Sacred Mountain. Coming up on Earth Focus.
In downtown Beijing, on the 20th floor of a high-rise, one of China's senior environmental reporters is becoming a Buddhist.
Hi. 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 Frank? Hi. Hi.
Pleasure to meet you.
Nice to see you. Yeah.
Likewise.
Liu Jianchao is an investigative journalist. His first story about the environment was an expose about illegal dam construction on the upper Yangtze River. It made national headlines. His hard-hitting stories eventually got him fired, so he continued his work as the Beijing editor of China Dialogue, an online international journal. But after 10 years of reporting, he was feeling burned out.
Okay.
I think that our environmental activists and those who work for public welfare need more powerful spiritual support. Why? Every day, what we do may be good deeds which give us positive energy. But meanwhile, what we are facing is the darkest side of the world. Every day, what we see is polluted air, polluted rivers, and the slaughter of wild animals. This kind of negative energy attacks us all the time. We've been working on environmental protection for a long time, but the situation in China is getting worse every day. Where do we draw our strength from?
Liu Jianchao is one of millions of Chinese who are returning to Buddhist, Daoist, and Confucian temples that were once condemned by the government.
A little more than 4 decades ago, during China's Cultural Revolution, many Buddhist temples like this one in central Beijing were destroyed or defaced. Today, these temples are alive with worshippers. By some accounts, 1 out of every 5 Chinese, 240 million people, call themselves Buddhist.
Some scholars say this search for faith is linked to China's massive environmental problems.
I had been filming in China since 2008 when I first started to meet some of the kind of leading environmental activists and journalists in China. When my friend Liu Jianchao said he's becoming a Buddhist, particularly a Tibetan Buddhist, I was very curious about why. We had already decided we would make a little documentary that would sort of show people what it is that has attracted him. But when I asked him just in shorthand, what is it that you're looking for in a religion, in a faith, in a culture? And he said, well, I've been for 15 years, he said, I've been reporting on the environment. And in that time, everything is still getting worse. So you begin to feel like, what's the point? We're exhausted, we're burnt out. And he said, I needed something more enduring, something for the longer term, something that would allow me to have a little bit more faith in my own work. Well, I asked Liu Jianchao, how would we show people what it is about the Tibetans that really appeal to you? And he said, well, you should just go talk to one of the Tibetan monks, the kind of person that I met all the time up there. So, go into the mountains and meet some of the people and listen to the way that they talk about nature. And you'll see what it was that really, appealed to me.
Today, this lake is the scene of annual gatherings of Buddhist monks. It's also the site of a special meeting between Buddhists and scientists. Dr. Liu Jianchao is a conservation biologist at Peking University. She's been working with Tibetans in this area for many years.
During
the 1990s, when I went to the Tibetan area for the first time, I saw something that really surprised me. There was a lot of logging going on. But in some areas, the wild animals were not afraid of people. And they were very old trees, 600 or 700 years old. The ancient forest was preserved. I asked the local people, how is this possible? People said, this is our sacred mountain. This was a big shock to me. Just the concept of sacred mountain was good enough to preserve the resources. It's more powerful than the law or the preaching of scientists. Today, the system is still functioning. In the core area, nothing should be touched. Then, in a broader area, killing is not allowed. No living beings should be harmed. We did a survey on birds, and we discovered that wherever the belief in sacred mountains is strong, there is greater biodiversity. So this shows scientifically the environmental value of sacred mountains.
Then, for 2 years, Dr. Liu and her students used GPS to map the sacred mountains in the Ganzi district of Western Sichuan province. They found an average of 3 sacred mountains near each monastery in the district. In the United States, the protected area would be about the size of Vermont and New Hampshire combined. Nearly 1/3 of the land is in sacred areas.
Who will protect the environment? In the West and in China, it is government responsibilities. But the Tibetans don't think of that way. If you think of that way, you are not Buddhist. You are the protector. No matter if you are a newborn or 80 years old, you are all protector. You have responsibilities. All life should be protected.
In some districts, local governments are recognizing the sacred mountains, and some are even hiring Tibetans to take care of the national nature reserves.
The cultural values of Buddhism are very comforting to the scholars of conservation. I felt at last we found a way, and I began to gain confidence in humanity. These Tibetan people are not wealthy, yet they can still think of other creatures. Not just other people, other creatures. This is altruistic behavior. If they can do it, there's hope that other people can do it as well.
I've made a whole series of films about the beginning of environmental movements in different parts of the world at different times. And in each of the films, I found myself quite drawn to trying to understand what you might call the native religions, or the hunter-gatherer religions, or some of the kind of the peripheral cultures that you find in the United States, in Russia, in China. Some of those older cultures of hunter-gatherers who live close to the land often have the similar kinds of beliefs about the sacredness of the environment and the need to protect and preserve it for all future generations, because their very livelihood always depended on maintaining the quality of the environment that they lived in. Tibetan Buddhism, like many of the original sort of hunter-gatherers who lived in Europe, in Asia, in North America, had a very powerful relationship to the land. They have a deep respect and a kind of a sacredness to the environment, because that was the means of ensuring livelihood for the next generations and 7 generations to come. And so the Tibetan Buddhists come from that kind of tradition. So I think that's underlying a bit of their immediate sense of respect for all life. So it's a very practical side, I guess, from our point of view. From their point of view, it's just part of the way that they look at the world, which is life is sacred and you must preserve it, and you actually must even protect areas from human intervention in order to ensure a healthy future for the environment.
Liu Jianchao is one of millions of Chinese who are taking a fresh look at traditional culture. Here, under the guidance of Chami Rinpoche, Tibetan Buddhism has changed the way he sees the world.
Before, I only wrote from a legal point of view. It's wrong, or this is a national park and how can you destroy it? Now, when I write a story about fish that were killed by a dam, what I have in mind is there are millions of lives here. I strongly believe that I should write about it this way. I'm sure I should speak on their behalf. I shouldn't just think of what is good for us, what's good for humans. I can clearly see my change.
Observing this new interest in religion and conservation, China's Communist Party is now cautiously supporting it.
Former State Councilor Mr. Dai Bingguo spoke at the annual forum on ecological civilization and Buddhist culture.
Traditional culture promotes harmony between man and nature and encourages limited consumption and a simple way of life. We support this. We don't oppose taking from nature. We do oppose overexploitation. We want Gold Mountain, but we also want Clearwater and Green Mountain.
My Chinese friends were very quick to point out that when you see the government, as we did, making some very sort of friendly noises towards an organized religions, it's a bit of a surprise often for people from outside China, like how is it that this government that used to be all about atheism is now sort of very friendly towards at least a schedule of religions, particularly the traditional cultural religions like Buddhism and Daoism and Confucianism. And the fact is that the Communist Party is observing that tens of millions of people are becoming more religious. And they're realizing that this might actually be an opportunity for them to kind of encourage these religions to be environmentally conscious and to support that side of the religions, because that will help people become maybe a little bit less materialistic, a little less oriented towards consumption. I think the government realizes that the era of kind of, 13% growth every year is coming to an end. Pollution is going to be an issue that's going to take 10 or 20 years to sort out. So they really need to kind of encourage a culture, or at least to be supportive of a culture that is less oriented towards consumption, placing less value always on material gain, because those material gains aren't going to be as easy to get in the future as they have been in the past.
I think one of the things that I've seen over the last few years, and increasingly so, is a sense that if there is going to be some kind of Chinese solution to these issues, it is going to come out of Chinese traditional culture. So my sense is that this partnership between religion and the government around environment is only going to get stronger and stronger.
There's hope these handshakes signal real support for ancient traditions of respect for nature in a society that has paid a heavy environmental price for progress in recent decades.